The performance review in my file wasn't the one I attended. I had sat through a professional conversation about project timelines and team development. What the executive committee received included concerns about my leadership capability and recommendations for demotion. I'm Claire, a department manager at a mid-sized software company in Seattle. For 8 years, I'd led the client services team through 3 major product launches and maintained a 96% client retention rate. My team respected me. My clients trusted me. My results were documented. Until last Thursday, when apparently none of that mattered anymore. The review was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I arrived 5 minutes early at the conference room on the 4th floor. Linda from HR was already there with her laptop open. My direct supervisor, the VP of Operations, joined us at exactly 2. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. We discussed my team's performance metrics, we reviewed client feedback scores, we talked about the challenges of managing remote team members and my plans for the next quarter. The tone was professional. The feedback was balanced. There were suggestions for improvement, but nothing unusual, nothing concerning. I left the meeting feeling neutral about the conversation. That was Thursday. On Monday morning, I received a calendar invitation from the CEO. Performance discussion. Urgent. I arrived at his office at 9. He had a printed document on his desk. My performance review. He slid it across to me without preamble. "I'm concerned about what I'm seeing here," he said. I read through the document carefully. The section on leadership capability described me as resistant to feedback and unable to adapt to changing priorities. The client satisfaction section mentioned several complaints about communication style and difficulty managing client expectations. The final recommendation suggested a 90-day performance improvement plan with possible reassignment to an individual contributor role. I read it twice. None of those statements had been discussed in my review meeting. None of those concerns had been raised by my supervisor. The complaints about communication style didn't exist in any client feedback I'd seen. "This isn't what we discussed in my review," I said. The CEO looked at me carefully. According to Linda's notes, these were the primary concerns. They weren't mentioned in the meeting. "Are you saying the review document is inaccurate?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm saying the content of this document doesn't reflect the conversation that took place." He leaned back in his chair. "Linda has been with us for 12 years. She's thorough and professional. I trust her documentation." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my expression neutral. "I understand," I said. "We'll proceed with the improvement plan as outlined. Linda will send you the details by end of day." I returned to my desk and opened my calendar. I checked the date and time of my review meeting. Thursday, October 12th, 2 o'clock. I opened my notes application. I'd taken brief notes during the meeting, as I always did. Timestamps, key discussion points, action items. Nothing in my notes matched the review document. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes, reviewing everything I could remember from that meeting. The conversation had been straightforward, professional. There had been no discussion of leadership concerns, no mention of client complaints, no suggestion of reassignment. Someone had changed the review after the meeting. That afternoon, Linda sent the performance improvement plan. 60 days, weekly check-ins, specific behavioral modifications required, mandatory training on collaborative leadership and client communication. I read through it carefully and saved it to my personal drive. Then I did something I'd never done before. I began documenting everything. I created a folder on my personal laptop titled Performance Documentation, October 2024. I saved my meeting notes. I saved the review document. I saved the improvement plan. I created a timeline documenting the exact dates and times of every interaction. I also started observing Linda more carefully. She arrived at 8:30 every morning. She had standing meetings with the VP of Operations every Tuesday and Thursday at 10. She left for lunch at noon and returned at 12:45. She scheduled most of her performance review meetings on Thursdays between 2 and 4, and she always stayed late on Wednesdays. On Wednesday evening, I worked late finishing a client proposal. Most of the office had cleared out by 6. I needed to print the proposal on the color printer near the HR offices. As I walked down the hallway, I heard voices coming from Linda's office. Her door was slightly open. I recognized her voice, and the VP of Operations. I slowed my pace. "We need the documentation to be consistent," Linda was saying. "If we're going to make the case for reassignment, the review needs to support it." "What about her metrics?" the VP asked. "Her numbers are solid." Metrics don't tell the whole story. Leadership capability is subjective. We can frame it as a culture fit issue. I stopped walking. "The CEO is asking questions," the VP said. "He wants specifics." "I'll add more detail to the write-up. Client communication concerns. Team feedback about management style. It doesn't need to be provable. It just needs to be documented." I stood in the hallway, perfectly still. "When do you want to schedule the follow-up?" the VP asked. "Give it 2 weeks. Let the improvement plan run for a bit. Then we can document failure to improve and move forward with the reassignment." I heard chairs moving. They were standing up. I walked quickly back toward my office, my heart pounding. They were fabricating my review. They were planning to document failure before I'd even started the improvement plan. They'd decided on reassignment before giving me a chance to respond. I reached my desk and sat down. My hands were shaking. I took 3 deep breaths and forced myself to think clearly. I couldn't confront them. I couldn't accuse them without proof. What I'd heard was a private conversation. It wasn't evidence. It was my word against theirs. But I could document what I'd heard. I opened my personal laptop and typed everything I remembered from the conversation. The date, the time, the exact words I'd heard, where I was standing, why I was in that part of the office. Then I went home and thought about what to do next. The next morning, I arrived at work early. I submitted a request to IT for access to my personnel file. I framed it as a routine request. I wanted to review my employment history and performance documentation for my own records. IT forwarded the request to HR. Linda approved it the same day. I received a digital copy of my file that afternoon. I reviewed every document carefully. Performance reviews from the past 8 years, promotion letters, client commendations, training certifications. Every review before this year had been positive. Every evaluation had praised my leadership and client management. Multiple documents highlighted my ability to handle difficult situations professionally. The contrast with my recent review was stark. I saved everything to my personal drive. I also began paying closer attention to when Linda and the VP met. Their Tuesday and Thursday meetings were scheduled on the company calendar, but they had additional conversations that weren't documented. Wednesday evenings, Monday mornings before most people arrived, Friday afternoons after the executive team left. I started tracking the pattern. On the following Wednesday, I stayed late again. This time, I brought my phone. At 6:15, I walked past Linda's office. Her door was closed, but I could hear voices inside. I continued to the printer, printed the document I actually needed, and walked back slowly. The voices were clearer now. Linda and the VP. I stopped near the water fountain, 20 feet from her office. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. I pressed record and set the phone on the edge of the fountain, partially hidden behind a plant. Then I walked to the restroom and waited. 5 minutes later, I returned to the fountain. I could still hear voices from Linda's office. I picked up my phone and walked back to my desk, keeping the recording running. I stopped the recording after 10 minutes. That evening at home, I listened to it 3 times. The audio quality wasn't perfect. Some words were muffled, but the conversation was clear enough. Linda was discussing my improvement plan progress. She mentioned that I'd completed the required training, but that it wouldn't be enough to demonstrate real change. The VP suggested they document ongoing concerns about team morale and resistance to implementing feedback. They discussed timing. They wanted to move forward with reassignment before the end of the year. "We need to be careful," the VP said. "She's been here a long time. If she pushes back, this could get complicated." "That's why the documentation has to be airtight," Linda replied. "Every conversation, every check-in, everything goes in the file." "What if she goes to the CEO directly?" "The CEO trusts me, and he's already seen the review. As long as we're consistent, she doesn't have leverage." I stopped the recording and sat in silence. They were building a case against me. They were fabricating documentation. They were planning every step to make the reassignment look justified. And they thought I wouldn't figure it out. I saved the recording to 3 separate locations: my personal laptop, an external drive, a secure cloud storage account. Then I started researching. I reviewed the employee handbook section on performance management. I read through the company's code of conduct. I examined the whistleblower policy and the procedures for reporting ethics violations. I also looked up Washington state employment law. I spent hours reading about wrongful termination, retaliation, and fraudulent documentation. I learned about the protections for employees who report misconduct. I researched what constituted evidence in employment disputes. I wasn't planning to sue. I was planning to build an airtight case. Over the next 2 weeks, I attended every required check-in with Linda. I completed every assignment in the improvement plan. I documented every conversation with timestamps and detailed notes. I also continued recording. I recorded 3 more Wednesday evening conversations. Each one revealed more of their strategy. They discussed how to frame my failure to improve. They planned which clients to contact about communication concerns. They rehearsed how to present the reassignment recommendation to the CEO. They were thorough. They were strategic. They were creating a complete paper trail. But so was I. By early November, I had 6 recorded conversations. I had copies of every performance document. I had my original meeting notes that contradicted the official review. I had 8 years of positive performance history. I also had something else. During one of the recorded conversations, Linda mentioned that they'd used the same approach with another manager 2 years ago. Someone named David Chen, who'd been reassigned to a lower role and eventually left the company. I looked him up on LinkedIn. He was now working at a competitor. His profile showed he'd been a senior manager here for 6 years before leaving. I sent him a careful message. I explained that I was experiencing some challenges with my performance review process and had heard he'd gone through something similar. I asked if he'd be willing to talk. He responded the next day. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning at a place far from the office. David was cautious at first, but when I explained what was happening, the fabricated review, the staged improvement plan, the recorded conversations, he opened up. "They did the same thing to me," he said. "Linda rewrote my review after the meeting, added concerns that were never discussed, put me on an improvement plan that was designed to fail. Did you fight it?" "I tried. I went to the CEO. He sided with HR, said he trusted their documentation more than my recollection. I spent 6 months on the improvement plan before they reassigned me. I left 3 months later." "Did you have any evidence?" He shook his head. "Just my word against theirs. I wish I'd known what they were doing at the time. I would have documented everything." I nodded slowly. "Why are they doing this to you?" he asked. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. But over the next week, I started to piece it together. I reviewed my recent project assignments. I looked at my team's client roster. I examined the organizational structure. My team managed the company's highest value clients. The accounts I oversaw represented 40% of annual revenue. If I were reassigned, those accounts would need a new manager. I checked the recent hiring announcements. Linda's nephew had been hired 6 weeks ago as a senior account manager. He'd come from a smaller company with less impressive credentials, but he'd been placed in a newly created role reporting directly to the VP of Operations. I searched the employee directory for his name, Ryan Porter. I looked him up on LinkedIn. His previous experience was thin. 2 years at a small firm, no major accounts listed, no significant accomplishments. But he was family. I sat back and looked at the timeline I'd been building. Ryan was hired in early September. My performance review was scheduled for October. The fabricated documentation started immediately after. The reassignment plan was designed to be completed by year end. They were clearing a path for Ryan to take over my accounts. I documented the connection. I added it to my evidence folder. I noted the hiring date, the family relationship, and the timing of my performance issues. Then I continued gathering evidence. In mid-November, Linda scheduled a progress review. She sat across from me with printed copies of my check-in notes. "We're not seeing the improvement we expected," she said. I kept my expression neutral. "Your team members have expressed ongoing concerns about your communication style. Several clients have mentioned they're not seeing changes in how you manage their accounts." "Which team members?" I asked. "I'm not at liberty to share that. The feedback was provided confidentially." "Which clients?" "Again, that's confidential." I nodded. "I'd like to address the concerns directly, if possible. Can you provide specific examples? The pattern is more important than individual incidents. We're looking at overall behavioral change." I took notes while she spoke. She slid another document across the table. "This is a formal notice that we're extending your improvement plan by 30 days. We want to give you more time to demonstrate sustainable change." I read through it carefully. The extension included the same vague language about leadership concerns and communication issues. It referenced the confidential feedback. It outlined consequences for failure to improve. I signed it without objection. "I appreciate the additional time," I said. Linda looked slightly surprised. She'd been expecting resistance. That evening, I recorded another conversation. This time, Linda and the VP were discussing the extension. "She's being compliant," Linda said. "Too compliant. I expected more pushback." "Maybe she's finally accepting the feedback," the VP replied. "Or she's planning something. We need to accelerate the timeline. I don't want to give her time to build a case." "What are you thinking?" "We document a major incident, something that clearly demonstrates she hasn't improved. Then we can move forward with immediate reassignment." "What kind of incident?" "A client complaint. Something serious enough to justify immediate action." I listened to the recording 3 times that night. They were planning to fabricate a client complaint. They were going to create evidence of a major failure that never happened. I needed to move faster. The next day, I began reaching out to my clients directly. I scheduled routine check-in calls with each one. I asked about their satisfaction with our service. I requested written feedback on our recent projects. Every client responded positively. Several sent detailed emails praising my team's work and my personal attention to their accounts. I saved every response. I also started documenting my team's feedback more formally. I scheduled one-on-one meetings with each team member. I asked about their experience working under my leadership. I requested honest assessments of my management style. Every team member gave positive feedback. Several mentioned that I was the best manager they'd worked with at the company. I asked them to put their feedback in writing for my professional development records. They all agreed. By the end of November, I had written testimonials from 12 clients and 8 team members, all positive, all contradicting the claims in my performance review. I added them to my evidence folder. On December 3rd, Linda scheduled an urgent meeting. She had the VP of Operations with her. "We received a serious complaint from one of your clients," she said. I waited. TechCorp expressed concerns about your handling of their account transition. They said you were dismissive of their concerns and failed to respond to urgent requests. TechCorp was one of our largest clients. I'd spoken with their CEO just 2 days earlier. The conversation had been positive. They'd specifically praised my responsiveness. "When did they file this complaint?" I asked. "Yesterday afternoon." "Can I see the complaint documentation?" Linda hesitated. "It was a verbal complaint to the VP. We're documenting it now. I'd like to speak with the client directly to address their concerns." "That won't be necessary. We've already assured them we're taking corrective action." I kept my voice calm. I spoke with their CEO on Monday. He didn't mention any issues. In fact, he sent me a written commendation for our recent project completion. I pulled out my phone and showed them the email. It was dated December 1st, 2 days ago. Linda's expression didn't change, but I saw the VP shift uncomfortably. "There may be a disconnect between their executive team and their operations staff," Linda said smoothly. "The complaint came from their director of operations. I'll reach out to confirm," I said. "I don't think that's appropriate given the circumstances. We need to take this complaint seriously." "I agree, which is why I'd like to address it directly with the client." The VP spoke for the first time. "We think it's best if you step back from the account while we investigate." "Am I being removed from the account?" "Temporarily, until we can resolve the complaint." I nodded slowly. "I'd like that decision documented in writing, please." Linda made a note. "We'll send you a formal notification this afternoon." I returned to my desk and immediately called the director of operations at TechCorp. We'd worked together for 3 years. "Hey, Claire," he answered. "What's up?" "I wanted to follow up on our account status. Have there been any issues with our service recently?" "Issues? No, everything's great. Why?" "I received some feedback that there might be concerns about responsiveness." "From who? We've been really happy with your team. You've been on top of everything." "So no complaints about the account transition?" "None. The transition was smooth. You handled it perfectly." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sent him a follow-up email asking him to confirm our conversation in writing. He responded within 10 minutes with a detailed email praising my work and confirming there were no complaints. I saved the email and added it to my evidence folder. The fabricated complaint was falling apart before it could even be formalized. That evening, I stayed late again. I positioned myself near the HR offices at 6:30. Right on schedule, I heard Linda and the VP talking. I started recording. "The TechCorp angle isn't going to work," the VP said. "She got ahead of it. She has written documentation from the client." "Then we need something else, something she can't refute." "Like what?" "Team morale. We document that her team is dissatisfied, that people are requesting transfers." "Has anyone actually requested a transfer?" "Not yet, but we can suggest it. Plant the idea with a few team members. Make it seem like it's coming from them." I stopped the recording after 15 minutes. They were planning to manipulate my team members into requesting transfers. They were going to create the appearance of a morale problem. I needed to finish building my case and take it to the board. That weekend, I organized everything I'd collected over the past 2 months. I created a detailed timeline document. It showed the sequence of events from my review meeting through every fabricated complaint and recorded conversation. I compiled all the recordings into a single folder with timestamps and transcripts. I gathered all the written testimonials from clients and team members. I included the comparison between my meeting notes and the official review document. I documented the family connection between Linda and Ryan Porter, including his hiring date and the timing of my performance issues. I added the information from David Chen about the pattern of similar treatment. I wrote a formal complaint to the board of directors. I kept it factual and professional. I outlined the timeline. I explained that my performance review had been altered after the meeting. I described the recorded conversations, revealing the plan to fabricate documentation. I presented evidence of the family connection and the motive for my reassignment. I attached 40 pages of supporting documentation. I reviewed the complaint 5 times over the weekend. On Monday morning, I encrypted all my evidence files and saved them to multiple secure locations. Then, I sent the complaint to the board chair's executive assistant with a request for confidential handling. I marked it urgent and requested an independent investigation. I received an automated response acknowledging receipt. For 3 days, I continued my normal work routine. I attended my team meetings. I managed my remaining client accounts. I responded professionally in my interactions with Linda and the VP. I gave no indication that anything had changed. On Thursday morning, I received a calendar invitation from the board chair's office. Confidential discussion, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Linda received one scheduled for Wednesday at 2. The VP of Operations received one for Wednesday at 4. I confirmed my attendance. That weekend, I prepared for the meeting. I reviewed my documentation again. I organized my evidence chronologically. I created a summary document highlighting the key points. I practiced explaining the situation calmly and professionally. I didn't rehearse accusations or emotional appeals. I prepared to present facts. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the executive building 15 minutes early. The board chair's assistant directed me to a private conference room on the top floor. 3 people were waiting: the board chair, the company's outside legal counsel, an independent HR consultant who'd been brought in for the investigation. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," the board chair said. "We take these allegations very seriously." I sat down and placed my folder on the table. "Walk us through what happened," he said. I explained the timeline, starting with my performance review meeting on October 12th, the professional conversation I'd had with Linda and my supervisor, the altered review document I received the following Monday, the fabricated concerns that were never discussed. Then I explained the improvement plan based on false documentation. I described the first conversation I'd overheard, the decision to document everything, the pattern of Wednesday evening meetings. I explained my decision to record the conversations after exhausting other options for gathering evidence. I presented the 6 recorded conversations that revealed the systematic plan to fabricate my failure and force reassignment. I showed them the family connection between Linda and Ryan Porter, the hiring timeline that coincided with my performance issues. I presented testimonials from 12 clients and 8 team members, all contradicting the claims in my review. I showed them the fabricated TechCorp complaint and my documentation proving it was false. I explained the pattern with David Chen and potentially other managers. The legal counsel took detailed notes throughout. The HR consultant asked clarifying questions about specific dates and interactions. The board chair listened without interrupting. When I finished, the room was quiet for a full minute. "You recorded these conversations without the participants' knowledge?" the legal counsel said finally. "Yes. Washington is a 2-party consent state for private conversations. I understand the recordings may not be admissible in legal proceedings, but they demonstrate the pattern of conduct and corroborate the documentary evidence. Every claim made in the recordings can be verified through written documentation." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" the HR consultant asked. "I needed to understand what was happening. One altered review could be a mistake. A pattern of fabrication needed documentation. I also needed to rule out the possibility that my perception was wrong, that perhaps I was missing something about my performance." The client and team testimonials confirmed that the issues in my review were fabricated. The board chair leaned forward. If what you're presenting is accurate, this represents serious misconduct by senior staff. We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation. I understand. We're going to place you on paid administrative leave while we review this. It's not punitive. It's to ensure you're not subjected to retaliation during the investigation. I nodded. Do not discuss this with anyone in your department. Do not contact Linda or your supervisor. We'll be conducting interviews over the next 2 weeks. The HR consultant spoke. We'll also be reviewing the case you mentioned, David Chen, and we'll be auditing recent performance management actions across the company to identify any similar patterns. The legal counsel added, we'll need to retain your evidence files, all recordings, documents, and communications. We'll provide you with a receipt and maintain them in secure custody. I have everything organized and labeled, I said. I can transfer the files to you today. We'll also need you to sign a confidentiality agreement regarding the investigation, the board chair said. This is to protect both you and the integrity of the process. He slid a document across the table. I read through it carefully. It prevented me from discussing the specifics of the investigation with anyone except my attorney or the investigators. It included protections against retaliation. It outlined the timeline for the investigation. I signed it. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I left with detailed instructions about my administrative leave. I was told to work from home on client projects that didn't require interaction with my team. I was given a direct contact for the outside legal counsel if I experienced any retaliation or intimidation. I was instructed to forward any communications from Linda or the VP to the investigators immediately. I returned to my office, packed my laptop and essential files, and left before lunch. I didn't speak to anyone on my way out. For 2 weeks, I worked from home. I completed client reports, I prepared quarterly forecasts, I maintained communication with my clients through email and video calls. I didn't mention the investigation to anyone. My team members reached out asking if I was okay. I told them I was working on a special project from home and would be back in the office soon. I received no communication from Linda or the VP of operations. On the 3rd week, the board chair's assistant called me. We'd like you to come in tomorrow at 10. The investigation is complete. Please don't discuss this call with anyone. I confirmed I'd be there. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed everything that had happened over the past 3 months. The altered review, the recordings, the fabricated complaints, the systematic plan to destroy my career. I thought about David Chen and the others who'd been forced out. I wondered what the board had found. The next morning, I arrived at the executive building at 9:45. I was directed to a large conference room on the top floor. 5 people were waiting. The board chair, the CEO, the legal counsel, the HR consultant, and the company's chief financial officer. The atmosphere was formal. Please sit down, the board chair said. I sat. We've completed our investigation, he began. We interviewed 23 current and former employees. We reviewed 7 years of performance management documentation. We audited HR's record-keeping practices and email systems. We brought in a digital forensics team to verify the authenticity of the recordings you provided. He paused. Everything you reported has been substantiated. Linda Mason and the VP of Operations systematically falsified performance reviews for multiple managers over a 4-year period. They manipulated documentation. They fabricated client complaints. They conspired to force reassignments to benefit preferred candidates, including family members. The CEO spoke next. Linda Mason and the VP of Operations were terminated for cause yesterday afternoon. Their employment was ended immediately. We've also rescinded the job offer to Ryan Porter and banned him from future consideration for employment. The board chair continued. We found evidence of similar conduct involving 5 other managers over the past 4 years. 3 were forced to resign. 1 accepted a lower position. 1, David Chen, left the company. We're currently reviewing whether we have legal exposure from those cases and whether we need to offer remediation. The CFO slid a folder across the table. Your performance review has been removed from your file entirely and replaced with a formal commendation. All documentation related to the improvement plan has been destroyed. We're issuing a written apology that will be placed in your permanent record. I opened the folder. The commendation praised my 8 years of exemplary service. It specifically noted my professionalism during a difficult situation. It confirmed that the performance issues documented in the October review were fabricated, and that my actual performance had been outstanding. The CEO spoke again. We're promoting you to Senior Director of Client Services, effective immediately. This comes with a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities. You'll be joining the executive leadership team and reporting directly to me. He slid another document across the table. I read through the offer letter. The salary was 30% higher than my current rate. The position included equity grants. The title came with a seat in all executive strategy meetings. We'd also like you to chair a task force to rebuild our HR policies and performance management systems, the board chair said. Your experience has highlighted critical failures in our oversight. We need someone who understands both the operational and ethical dimensions of these processes. The HR consultant added, I'll be staying on as interim head of HR while we search for a permanent replacement. I'd welcome your input on the qualities and experience we should be looking for in that role. The legal counsel spoke. We're also offering a retention bonus and additional compensation to acknowledge what you went through. The details are in the offer package. Additionally, we want to make clear that we're grateful you brought this to our attention through proper channels, rather than pursuing external legal action. I looked at the retention bonus amount. It was substantial. We recognize that you could have filed a lawsuit, the board chair said. You had evidence of fraud, retaliation, and potentially other claims. Instead, you gave us the opportunity to address this internally and prevent future harm. That level of integrity is exactly what we need in our leadership. I read through all the documents carefully. The promotion, the compensation adjustments, the formal apology, the task force charter. Everything was in writing. Everything was official. Do you have any questions? The CEO asked. What happens to the other managers who were affected? I asked. We're reaching out to all of them, the board chair said. We're offering reinstatement where appropriate, financial settlements, and formal apologies. We're also correcting their personnel records and providing references that reflect their actual performance. And David Chen? We've already spoken with him. We're offering him a senior position if he's interested in returning. We're also providing compensation for the loss he suffered. I nodded slowly. We want to be very clear, the CEO said. This wasn't just about you. This was about a systemic failure in our organization. You exposed it. You documented it. You gave us the evidence we needed to clean house. That took courage and intelligence. I looked at the offer letter again. I'd like 24 hours to review everything, I said. Of course, the board chair said. Take the time you need. I gathered the documents and stood. One more thing, the CEO said. We're implementing new controls on all HR processes. Dual authorization for all performance reviews. Independent audits of all documentation. Mandatory training on ethical conduct. And we're creating an anonymous reporting channel that bypasses HR and goes directly to the board. Those are good changes, I said. They're necessary changes. Changes that should have been in place years ago. I left the executive building with the folder under my arm. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before driving home. I reviewed the offer letter 3 times that evening. The promotion was significant. The compensation was generous. The opportunity to rebuild the HR function was meaningful. But more than any of that, the company had taken accountability. They'd investigated thoroughly. They'd taken action. They'd made systemic changes. They'd offered to make the other victims whole. The next morning, I called the board chair's assistant and accepted the offer. I returned to work the following Monday. Linda's office had been cleared. The VP of Operations was gone. New interim leadership had been announced. The company sent a carefully worded all-staff email about organizational changes to strengthen our commitment to ethical leadership and professional development. No details were provided about why the changes had occurred, but word spread quickly. Several colleagues stopped by my desk to congratulate me on the promotion. A few mentioned they'd heard there had been some issues with HR, but didn't press for details. I thanked them and focused on my new responsibilities. My team had questions. I met with them as a group that first day back. I know there have been a lot of changes, I said. I want you to know that I'm still here. I'm still your manager. In fact, I've been promoted to senior director, which means our team is being expanded and will have additional resources. They looked relieved. What happened with Linda and the VP? One team member asked. There were some organizational changes at the leadership level. I can't discuss the details, but I can tell you that the company is committed to creating a more transparent and fair workplace. They seemed to accept that answer. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new role. I attended executive leadership meetings. I met with the board's governance committee. I began working with the HR consultant on policy reforms. We spent 3 months completely rebuilding the performance management system. We implemented mandatory documentation requirements. Every performance conversation had to be documented in real time, with the employee receiving a copy. Every review had to be co-signed by 2 levels of management. Every improvement plan required independent HR oversight. We created clear escalation paths for employees who disagreed with performance feedback. We established an ethics hotline that went directly to the board. We implemented quarterly audits of all HR documentation. We also reformed the hiring process to prevent nepotism. All candidates had to go through structured interviews with diverse panels. All hiring decisions required documentation of qualifications and interview scores. Family relationships had to be disclosed before the hiring process began. In January, David Chen reached out to me. He'd heard through former colleagues that there had been significant leadership changes at the company. I called him back. I heard Linda's gone, he said carefully. There were some organizational changes, I confirmed. Did it have anything to do with what we talked about? I paused. The investigation was confidential, but the results were starting to become public knowledge. The company conducted an internal review of HR practices. Some serious issues were found. Changes were made. Good, he said quietly. I'm glad someone finally did something. The company would like to speak with you, I said, about possibly coming back, in a senior role. He was silent for a moment. Are you serious? Completely. They're reaching out to everyone who was affected. They want to make things right. Who's running HR now? An interim consultant while we search for a permanent head. We're implementing new policies and oversight. It's a different organization than the one you left. I'd want to talk to the CEO directly. I can arrange that. We set up a meeting for the following week. David spoke with the CEO and the board chair for 2 hours. They explained what had happened. They showed him the new policies. They offered him a position as Director of Strategic Accounts with a significant compensation package. He accepted. By March, 4 of the 5 managers who'd been forced out had either returned to the company or accepted settlement agreements. The 5th had moved on professionally and declined the offer, but accepted a formal apology and a corrected reference. The company also settled with 3 former employees who'd left under suspicious circumstances during Linda's tenure. Every case was handled quietly and professionally. In April, I was asked to present to the board about the HR reforms we'd implemented. I walked them through the new policies, the documentation requirements, the oversight mechanisms, the training programs we developed for managers and HR staff. I also presented data showing the early results. Employee satisfaction with performance management had increased. The number of ethics complaints had gone up. which we viewed as positive because it meant people felt safe reporting issues. The resolution rate for those complaints was 100%. "You've done excellent work," the board chair said. "This is exactly what we needed." That evening, I stayed late at the office. Most people had left for the day. I sat in my new office, larger than my previous one, with a window overlooking the city, and thought about the past 6 months. I thought about the moment I'd overheard that first conversation in Linda's office, the decision to document instead of confront, the months of careful evidence gathering. I thought about the recordings I'd made, the risk I'd taken, the nights I'd spent organizing evidence and building my case. I thought about the board investigation, the 2 weeks of uncertainty, the possibility that they might not believe me. I thought about the outcome, the terminations, the policy reforms, the other managers who'd been made whole. It had worked. Not because I'd gotten revenge, not because I'd destroyed anyone's career out of anger. It had worked because I'd documented everything, because I'd built an irrefutable case, because I'd presented facts to people who had the authority and integrity to act on them. Linda and the VP had lost their jobs because of their own actions, because they'd fabricated documentation, because they'd abused their authority, because they'd harmed multiple people over multiple years. I'd simply made sure the right people saw the evidence. My phone buzzed. An email from the board chair. "The board voted unanimously tonight to approve your recommendations for the new head of HR position. We'll be starting the search next week. Thank you for your leadership on this critical initiative." I closed my laptop and looked out at the Seattle skyline. The office was quiet. The city lights were starting to come on as evening settled in. I gathered my things and walked to the elevator. 6 months ago, I'd walked these same hallways as someone whose career was being systematically dismantled. Someone whose professional reputation was being destroyed through fabricated documentation. Now I walked them as a senior director, as a member of the executive team, as someone who'd exposed serious misconduct and helped rebuild broken systems. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. Linda and the VP had underestimated my silence. They'd thought my compliance meant acceptance. They'd thought my lack of confrontation meant I didn't understand what they were doing. They were wrong. I didn't need to fight them in meetings or argue about fabricated reviews. I didn't need to defend myself against false accusations or beg the CEO to believe me. I just needed to document what they were doing, record their own words, gather evidence, build an airtight case, and then present it to people who had the authority to act. The elevator reached the ground floor. I walked through the lobby and out into the cool Seattle evening. Calm, professional, strategic. The same way I'd approached everything else.